This chapter is about standard costing, and the issue with standard costing is instead of just using a plain job order costing or process costing, what you do is all the data, all the inventory accounts go in at the standard amount. The differences between the standard and the actual then are held in separate smaller accounts called variance accounts. And I guess the key issue here is if you put in how much it's supposed to be and you capture the difference from what is and what's supposed to be in those variance accounts, then managements have immediate access to numbers that let them know that something's wrong. So let's zip through this real quick and see if it works for you. And let me get rid of this little guy here, whatever he is. All right. So a standard then is the amount that you should be using for the making of a product. We're going to make a jogging suit. And then it can break down into two subcategories, the first one being the price standard, so did we pay too much or too little? And then the quantity is did we use too much or too little? And your book will start out with saying ideal standards are perfect. That means that nothing ever goes wrong, nobody ever gets tired, machines never break down. And that's unpractical. Therefore, we have practical standards that do allow for this rest periods and etc. And you're going to see how that plays here in the next slide. So what we'll do, click here, is we're going to set up a standard cost card for a jogging suit. And what we're going to say is that we have this material called Verilon, and we're going to decide how much should we be spending for each jogging suit. So if the price to buy it is $5.70 a yard, we get a 20-cent discount for buying in big lots. We have to pay 40 cents a yard to get it shipped and 10 cents to get it handled. Then what we're saying is the standard price that we should turn around and say this is what it cost us to make is $6 per yard. So this is going to give us the direct materials, and it's going to be the dollar amount that we should be spending per yard. Now once we know how many yards or how much we're paying per yard, then what we want to do is look at how many yards should we be using. So if you look at the forms, at the patterns, then it calls for 2.8 yards. Then you have 6.6 yards allowed for waste because material's not like cookie dough. You can't just smash it back together and roll it out and make more cookies that once it's cut, it's gone. So this has 0.6 of a yard that's just waste, and 1/10 of a yard's put in there, which makes this a practical standard that you're going to have snags in material or discolorations or pieces that you have to pull out because they don't meet standards. So if we know that we're going to use 3.5 yards and we just got done calculating $6 per yard, we now know that the direct materials for the price and the quantity should be $21 for a suit. If we move on then, we can turn around and look at our labor. And in our labor, again, if you want to read the stuff up above, go ahead later. But for right now, let's say that the average person makes $13 an hour, and that we have to give them $4 in vacation pay and sick leave and this and that and everything else, and that for every hour they work, we accrue $1 in taxes. So now what we're saying is for direct labor, that we're going to incur at the rate of $18 per direct labor hour. Now that we know what the rate is, now we want to look at the quantity. So if we turn around and say, okay, it takes 1.4 hours to sew the material, that we have to allow for breaks and cleanup and setup and downtime of the machines. And I never figured out what this 2/10 is for rejects. I don't know whether they're talking about reject people or what the deal is, but when you get all done, we're saying that it should take 2 hours to sew this jogging suit. So if we got 2 hours to sew it and $18 per hour is the rate that we have to pay, then we now know that our direct labor is $36. If we move on here then and go to variable overhead, I just did that one. Let me move on here. Now we've got our variable overhead. We can turn around and say, okay, what if Speeds Incorporated applies $4 per direct labor hour? Well, we just got done saying that it's going to take 2 hours to sew the jogging suit. If we apply at $4 per hour of labor, then the variable overhead is going to be $8 per jogging suit. And Garrison treats the concept of fixed overhead a little bit differently, which will be the chapter 11 in the Garrison. So this section here is just going to be direct materials, direct labor, and variable overhead. All right. Now, once we get this all done, we can turn around and say, okay, that suit should cost us $65. We've got 3.5 yards at $6 a yard, $21. 2 hours of labor at $18 is $36. Variable overhead of 2 hours at $4. Now the jogging suit is $65. Once we get that established, then we can go use a general variance model here, and what we'll do is we'll put the actual quantity times the actual price on one end, the standard quantity times the standard price on the other end, and we'll calculate what the total variance is. So the right side will be the standard of what it should have cost us. The left side will be what it actually cost us. And the number that is the difference between the two is the standard variance, or the total variance. We can find out some more detail if we use this number in the middle, which is actual quantity times the standard price. So you'll notice that in this equation, actual price and actual price is constant in both terms. So what we're looking at is the actual quantity. Oops, I drew my numbers wrong, so let me back up here. Sorry to do this to you. It's going to lengthen it. Maybe I can get this cut out real quick. All right, let's go back and do this again. We got actual quantity times the actual price, the standard quantity times the standard price. If we have the actual quantity times the standard price, now the actual quantities cancel out, so what you're really doing is looking at the difference between the actual price and the standard price, which gives us the price variance. If we turn around and look at the other equation, then the standard price is the same here, the standard price is the same here. So what we're looking at, if we compare this set of numbers to this set of numbers, is the difference between the actual quantity and the standard quantity, which gives us our quantity variance. So if we go put some numbers to this, and we're going to use this as a scenario, what happens if we made 5,000 suits, that we used 20,000 yards, and we paid $5.40 a yard, and of all the materials that we bought, we put them all into production. So the actual quantity times the actual price tells us how much money we spent for materials, for our direct materials. If we go down here and say, well, 5,000 suits is supposed to take 3.5 yards per suit, a standard amount would be $17.5. Then off our cost card, we know it's supposed to be $6. So now we can compare the 105 to 108 and see, well, we're $3,000 unfavorable because we spent 108, we were only supposed to spend 105. If we do the number in the middle, which is the actual quantity times the standard price, now we compare the 108. Let me get rid of my little message here. We compare the 108 to 120 and see that we're 12,000 favorable. And when we compare the 120 to the 105, we see that we're 15,000 unfavorable. So a manager coming in and analyzing this would say, we're $3,000 off. We're 12,000 favorable because we paid $5.40 when we are allowed to spend $6. And the fact that the quantity variance is unfavorable, then what that would mean to us as managers is maybe we bought subgrade material. That we were supposed to spend $6, we only spent $5.40. That $5.40 might represent that it's a poor quality material, and because of that, we had a lot of waste and a lot of rework time. We just used too much of the product. And it's because of these variances, which are actual general ledger accounts, the price variance and quantity variance are ledger accounts. Now those get booked, and when we book them, then we immediately have those dollar values. Management can go in and make some decisions and say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. We shouldn't be having this amount of problem. We shouldn't have this kind of waste. If we move on and go to the next one, then this would be the example of the labor. So the labor, we would turn around and say, okay, we actually used 10,500 hours based on our time cards, and we paid an average of $20 an hour. So actual quantity, actual price, 210. We look at the standard. Well, what was the standard? How much should we have used? Well, for 5,000 suits, we should have used 2 hours per suit, so we should have used 10,000 hours at a standard of 18. So when we multiply the numbers out, we get 180 versus 210. We're 30,000 over. That's bad. We should have spent $180,000. We spent 210. And when we look at the number in the middle, then we turn around and see, well, 21,000 is rate and 9,000 is efficiency. So the answer here could be, well, if you're working with subgrade material, of course your efficiency is going to be off because they're going to have to stop and keep fixing the machines and taking care of the problem. Another problem might be, well, you just announced that nobody's getting a raise this quarter, so everybody's working slower. They're dragging their feet. And the rate variance might be, well, maybe you sent people home, so only if it's a union shop, only the higher paid employees stayed, so therefore your average, which was supposed to be $18 an hour, is bumped up to $20 because the more expensive people stayed. So this doesn't tell you exactly what's wrong. It just gives you indicators as to where to go look. At least you got some hard numbers and say, we spent $30,000 more than we were supposed to. I'm going to skip the next section just to make this shorter. Next gets the variable costing. But when you get down to Transparency 10-16, then this becomes the journal entries. So you can see that in the raw materials account, this is going to go in at the standard. And then the accounts payable is going to be in the actual. And then the difference between that is going to be the 12,000 that was the favorable price variance, and then down here the 15,000 for the unfavorable quantity variance. So it's going to buy the raw materials, then take it out of raw materials and put it into work in process. If you go back and look at the transparencies above, you're going to find the 12,000, the 15,000. You'll see all these numbers, and I'll let you match them up. Again, this is just a means of you put into your inventory accounts everything at a standard cost, and then you isolate all these variances. Hopefully this will give you a little bit of help, and I'm going to cut it short because I think if you just walk through this sample yourself, you'll see all these